My name is Era, and I'm the host of the Tamil Creator Podcast. I chat with creators from all over the world to share their stories and discuss hot topics in a way that I hope inspires, educates, and entertains you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Tamil Creator. I'm your host, and today I have someone that I'm very excited to be sharing their story, mainly because I'm a big fan of the brand that he works at, WestJet. But he's got a very fascinating story, similar to mine, but he's gone to do much better, things. His name is Gandeephan Ganeshalingam, and he's currently the VP of Technical Operations at WestJet, and he was the former Chief Innovation Officer at GE. So, Gandeephan, thank you for jumping on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Yeah, I got to start off with, your childhood, or what's the secret sauce for your parents? Because I mean, obviously success is very subjective in terms of how you look at it, but what most people would consider success. Your parents raised three kids that are doing pretty amazing things. I mean, I'm a new parent, so I'm trying to do some research for myself as well.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, it's I was reflecting on that the other day. I guess it's a combination of the, your parenting style and the way your parents bring you up and the communities you grew up in, right? So, for example, my dad's an engineer. He's a teacher as well. So he really never delegated his teaching responsibilities to anyone else. We would go into his office after work, even when we were kids, and he would teach us things that we were not even prepared for, right? I mean, we would be in grade 3 and he'd be trying to teach us quadratic equations and math techniques that were well ahead of our ages. And so he was always curious to teach and to share, and I think that was very helpful. My mom was the same way as well. And then I think the other piece, spent a lot of time with us. I think the other piece I thought was interesting was that we grew up in very select communities, like in Nigeria, where we grew up. We spent a lot of time in the university because my dad taught at the University of Lagos. And when we came here to Canada, we grew up in Waterloo because my dad taught at the University of Waterloo. And so just growing up in those university communities, there's a certain mindset that you sort of gain when you are around others who are educated and others who aspire to better things. And I think also just coming from a lower middle class background, we always sort of saw the value of hard work. And that was drummed into us from a very young age. Nothing was ever given to us, right? So that's sort of two things that I can think of off the top of my head.
That's fascinating. So I guess number one, you're thinking is just being in the physical environment of universities, which is centered around learning and people that are seeking to learn most of the time on their own accord, not being forced by parents. But number two, your dad kind of tried to stretch you guys beyond what you guys thought you were capable of by kind of pushing you, I guess, in a way that you were comfortable. When you look back, as my dad was similar, not with the educational background, but I think a lot of immigrant parents, the focus on education and, Kumon and just, if I got 98, it's why can't you get 90, 100? Reflecting now, maybe it was obviously beneficial in terms of your path, but at that time, if you do have any memory of it, were you or your brothers ever kind of, annoyed? Because me and my brothers, we were always we were just annoyed at that time, but now we're so thankful our dad, pushed us in that way. So yeah. Is it similar for you guys as well?
I think obviously at that age, there were times where we just did not want to learn. But my dad, he's an interesting motivator as well, right? He always knew what we liked and would use that as a carrot to get us to do things, right? And he always knew our limits as well. I just remember one time I would always look to get perfect on his test. He would write a test and give it to me. I'd always want to get perfect. And I think it stretched me to a point where I just completely lost it and started crying. He was, all right, fine. You know what? I think I've pushed you far enough. So until you come back to me and ask for help, I'm going to stop teaching you math and focus on other topics, for example. So he had this nice balance of encouraging, motivating, sort of using the carrot. He never used the stick as a motivator. And then, of course, stopping when he felt like he had pushed us too far, because he, at the back of his mind, was always worried about pushing us to the point where we hated some of the topics that, were really important to our future, right? He didn't want us to turn us off from it. So.
And how did your dad balance pushing you guys on those topics, but also outside of that, in terms of a social perspective or other things, whether it's sports or clubs or just things outside of learning? Because
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So, I mean, when you grow with two other brothers, you kind of have your own little social club itself, right? So that's that. It was sort of built in. But my dad was quite athletic as well. So, he, like I said, they spent a lot of time with us, and I think that's the other example of growing in a country where you didn't have any family. A lot of the other Sri Lankan Tamils were quite a distance away. And so you were your own family unit, right? You learned to really spend a lot of time with each other. And so in the evenings, he would take us out to play soccer. He was a pretty good soccer player, and just engage us in things that were outside of learning in school as well. And so, he taught us how to be good team players as well, I think, just through the process of sport.
interesting. Okay, I'm just doing my own research with my kids, so great learnings there.
Yeah.
From like your educational background, I know you did engineering and then you went to go do your MBA. I guess it sounds like your childhood, based on some of your answers, kind of pushed you to that first category of engineering with kind of that foundation of like math and science. What made you then decide that, hey, engineering wasn't enough? I think I need to do like an MBA or something like on the business side to further my career. Like, what was the thinking behind even doing your MBA?
It's kind of funny, right? I mean, there's a couple of honest answers behind that might not be as inspiring as it turns out to be, right? And one was that, listen, I went into engineering because my dad was an engineer, and I had this grand plan of being an engineer, maybe doing a first couple of years of engineering school, and then applying for med school, and then taking off. But the wonderful thing about Waterloo Co-op is that you get into that first engineering cohort that goes out and works, and you start to earn a paycheck, and then you never look back. And so that's how I got sort of finished chemical engineering, and then I don't think I've done chemical engineering since in any of my jobs. So that's sort of one example. And then in terms of the MBA, I really, it wasn't something that I was interested in and gung ho to go do at first, right? It took me many years. In fact, I graduated in 99, and I think I started my MBA in 2004. So a good 5 years. And I think what I realized was there was an element of the language of finance that I was missing when working in large corporate settings. There were decisions being made. There were patterns of thinking that I couldn't relate to, or I couldn't anticipate, that probably would have helped me do my job better. And help me really plan my career better more than anything else. So I thought that language of finance was important, something they don't teach in engineering school. They definitely don't teach it in high school either. So I took the MBA to really understand that language better, and I think that was incredibly beneficial. Now, the side benefit of that most people don't talk about is, when you're working for 5 years and you actually sort of start to do an MBA part-time, or you do it full-time, the process of actually taking a break from work and expanding your mind, talking to others, reaching out, I think it really has so many benefits beyond just the content you learn in MBA school as well, because you learn to connect all those habits. You learn to read things differently. You actually learn to learn again, because it's been 5 years since I went to university. So I found when I was doing it part-time, I was a lot more curious. I was able to connect the dots a little bit better. I was able to relate to people better. I just learned how to learn better as well. So these are all things that I found helpful. And I think you can get that even just going to a course or a seminar. It doesn't need to be an MBA. But, I took the MBA really to understand the finance side of business.
You took the MBA even before I did. I did it in, I think, I finished in 2010. There was already this kind of, not, I didn't say like the value of the MBA, or at least the perceived value was kind of decreasing a bit, or less. That's kind of what I heard. But when you were doing it, it's kind of, more in demand, I would say, or like more perceived positively. Would you agree with me that that's kind of changed with kind of how education is also evolving? Like you said, you don't need to do an MBA necessarily to get the same information or break out of the same thinking patterns to get the same benefits.
I couldn't agree more. I think you are right. I think the value of the MBA has diminished somewhat. I think it's actually quite driven by a number of these incredible entrepreneurs who've done well for themselves without really a formal business education as well, right? So entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily come from learning MBA, the rote method. I would say that, it is also in line with the fact that education, I think it still continues to be important, but maybe not mandatory either, right? I think what we're looking for is experience solving real world problems right now, and MBA schools that format their learning to make that happen produce graduates that I think are more set up to deal with the real world. I think the other thing to think about with education as well is when you're leading others who have higher levels of education than you, there's an interaction there that you have to manage and dance around. And so we look for that when we are hiring, but it's not a mandatory requirement to have a certain level of education. I think what we look more for is your years of experience and your years of applied problem solving.
That leads me to like my other question, because you're in a position of leadership, you're hiring people, and the younger people, especially, like even the ones I talk to, how they view education and how they think it should be viewed is different than maybe like me or yourself would back in the day would view it. So when you're hiring, there's so much competition for like really good talent, and to find good talent, it's almost like if you want to find property, it's on MLS, but if you want to find really good deals, you go off market. You fish in the places where other people don't fish. So without, I guess, giving away any secrets you don't want to give away, but like when you're hiring for people that are not coming from conventional paths, where do you find them? And what are some things that you look for? Or like, is them going to like getting a bachelor mandatory? Or what if you found somebody that just finished high school, but like, they did some really interesting side projects, or like they started a business that failed? Like, I'm just curious, like how you hire and like how you think about that.
I think all of those would be really curious and great examples of people I'd be interested in working with, right? I think one thing I've found is that it's really hard to build a formula and predict how someone is going to perform in a role, right? I think we have this sort of mentality of hiring has to have this sort of interview phase. You go through a bunch of resumes, you interview people, you work with world-class recruiters, and you just basically place your bets and hopefully things work out. What has worked really well for me is, obviously narrowing down a list of candidates who I feel I can invest some time in. And, before the job offer comes in and before I rip them away from their previous role or something else that they're interested in, I sort of orchestrate a day in the life, or if they're available, even a week in the life in the role, to get them to experience how they respond in our environment and our culture, right? The WestJet culture is very different than the GE culture. It was very different than the Avery Dennison culture. And there are many times where great candidates have come in and there's an immune response to them right away because of their style, their background, the way they communicate, how they think. And that is not something we can predict easily, right? So what we look for generally is, has this person been successful in the past? Are they really good problem solvers in the dimensions that we're looking for, in the space that we're looking for? Do they relate to people in ways that boost people up and support them versus sort of loners who are individual contributors who can't seem to add value to teams? And when they check those three major boxes, and really very few of them do when you dive deep and ask the right questions, then you bring them in and spend some time working with them and observing them wherever possible. For critical roles, I try and do that, and it's been quite successful for me.
How do you think the future of work will evolve as well? Because a lot of the things you talked about, I don't know if this will be it's going to be an ongoing trend, or if it's just because of COVID, it's just made it a kind of, this thing that has been more prevalent. But instead of full-time folks, like people that are more so almost like contractors, but like, they're doing work with you, say like 3 to 6 months, and then they do like another project because for them, they don't want to work at a particular company or project for too long. They want to, hop on, like maybe not the type of person you want, but I feel like there's more and more young people, even people like my age, that like that kind of style. And it's made possible because of COVID and, internet connection and like, this remote worker culture that's kind of becoming more prevalent. This episode is sponsored by nobody. That's right, nobody. So if you could be kind enough to hit that subscribe button, that would mean a lot to me. How do you think about that? Or is that something you had to contend with?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think what you're talking is a bit of a more extended version of the gig economy that we deal with, right? Where you've got some of these highly talented folks who really don't want to work full time, but are looking to contract out because they love the flexibility of what they do. And I think, we are, as large corporations, we are going to be challenged with that trend and that wave because, there's a school of thought that if you truly want to innovate, and innovation for me is very different than general problem solving. Innovation requires magic. It requires people to come together and really solve some of the world's toughest problems and capture some value out of that as well as you create value for the markets. If you want to do all of that, you have to find ways to relate to each other in a physical space. I've never found innovation to work in large distributed networks with people you don't know well, right? There's a chemistry involved. And so in order to incentivize that and sort of walk against the shifting trends we're seeing here, I think corporations have to change the way they incentivize some of these folks, right? I think, one of the reasons why Waterloo and that general Kitchener-Waterloo area has become such a hotbed for innovation is the students, for example, always own their IP, even as students, if they ever were working on projects or ideas. And I think there's an opportunity for companies to start thinking of themselves as microcells of entrepreneurs who really have the opportunity to own some of the equity and content that they build and give them the ability to own their IP and find ways to partner with the umbrella corporation that they work for. I think that way you build incentives, you build the right patterns of thinking, you build that connectivity and with them and the organization, and you allow them to achieve their dreams without really having to lose them and that talent every 3 years or so, right? Because that continuity of knowledge, the ability to learn faster than your competitor requires you to retain your people in ways that we're unable to do today. So that's a really interesting part of innovation that I'm looking forward to, and it's the future of work that I think we all have to spend some time thinking about.
How do you incentivize, like your belief is that innovation can only come from like physical proximity, at least, some hours or some duration of time per week. And there's a resistance now because people got comfortable during COVID of like not commuting, maybe spending time with family. But there's many causes of like why some percentage of people enjoy being completely remote and probably will never go back. How do you incentivize those people to even think about, because if there is talent that you want to get and you want them to be part of your process, because you think they can really help with contributing to innovation. I'm trying to read so many articles about that. Like I'm thinking for myself, what would get me to come in? And there's articles about ping pong tables and beer Fridays. They'll no longer be enough to get people to come in.
Yeah.
But what is the solution? I'm very curious because you're dealing with that. So I'm just curious.
I think, fundamentally, if someone has a hurdle to coming into work, you really have to understand what that hurdle is, right? And there are elements of that hurdle that you can work through and stuff that you can work through. But I think foundationally, if you're trying to solve a problem that truly is exciting and truly resonates with that person, then and they find that there's a team there that's willing to work with them and shares the same identity, and they feel like they belong with that team and they want to solve that problem together, I think you can make that magic happen. I think you can get people in there. And you don't have to be there all the time, but I've never heard of a startup where the founders were in 15 different countries and managed to work together, right? They were all together. They coalesced in ways and solved problems in ways that others don't. And that's why I think when you bring that entrepreneurial mindset, that startup mentality to work, you have to connect really inspirational problems with people. And that magic doesn't happen easily, and you have to put a lot of thought to it, which requires you to understand, where do I really place my investments? If I'm asking people to come into work, it better not be something that's transactional, right? It truly has to be something that's game changer for them and for us, and invest the time to create the environment for that to happen.
That makes sense. I guess going back to kind of, we just I was very curious on your thoughts there, because it's something I've been thinking a lot about. And I think obviously a lot of people in general have been thinking about. Yeah. I guess going back to you graduated, and I think one of your first jobs was in Cleveland. For someone that is graduated, because I know other engineers, they often go to the US somewhere for engineering roles, but a lot of people, they don't feel comfortable. They're scared because they're leaving home, they're leaving their family, their strong social connections to a new place where they're learning a new job. What made you decide to take that opportunity, and how did you prepare yourself for that move?
That's a great question. I think, if you were to ask me what is the one thing I did that probably catalyzed my career, was leaving Toronto for a while. especially when I was younger. And actually, my first job out of school was with Avery Dennison in Ajax, Ontario, and then I got promoted through Avery Dennison. And my first job was to go to Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is in the middle of nowhere, and I was given a production manager job. And so I took the role for a number of reasons, right? I think, I had an engineering background. I never had any line responsibilities, leading production, leading 50, 80 team members. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity, right? This wasn't going to happen quickly for me in Toronto, and I had to make that bet. It was scary. It was really anxious times for me. It was nerve-wracking, but I think, once you immerse yourself in the job and in the role, you really forget all the reasons why you didn't want to go there, right? Especially if you're the kind of person like me who just, you're so absorbed by the problems that you're trying to solve, and you're competitive by nature and you're trying to win. So I think, generally speaking, I didn't think a lot about the things I would lose. I thought about what I would gain, and that sort of that positive frame of mind is really important, because we as human beings tend to tell ourselves no more than anyone else tells us no, right? And I think it's important to really focus on the positive aspects of some of these decisions. And I was just grateful that I was in the right frame of mind to sort of frame it as a positive. I can learn a lot. I'm going to go, I'm going to miss my parents, my brothers, and everyone else, but I could always come back and see them whenever I wanted to.
The reason I also asked that is because you talked about your childhood being, you're very close to your parents, very close with your siblings. So, I mean, everyone's got to like leave the nest at some point, but it's still not easy to do and to break those bonds. So I was just.
It really isn't. It really isn't. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking about that to give it a shot, just because, it really expands the way you think and the people that you relate to when you get out of that nest, when you get out of that comfort zone. And I think just the broader lesson there is, whenever you feel yourself comfortable, whenever there isn't that little bit of anxiety that's driving you, you have to ask yourself, have I gotten too stale? Have I gotten too slow? Have I gotten too comfortable in what I'm doing? And what am I going to do to stretch myself? And that's something I learned from my parents, that I continue to do today, even with my kids, right? Just continuing to stretch myself.
Then, I think one of your next roles eventually was at GE as a chief innovation officer, which is, if that's in the role, it's got to be super interesting. Number one, how did that opportunity come about? And like, what was your day-to-day like as a chief innovation officer? The thing I think of is, in Batman, what's his name again? The guy who's at Wayne Enterprises that does all the fun research projects.
I think I know
Lucius Fox. Lucius Fox. Yeah. Is that what you're kind of doing, like that equivalent?
Yeah, no, it really was a phenomenal opportunity and role. I was in Ohio at the time, and my wife, who's a dentist, and we had 2 kids in Ohio and wanted to come back to Canada, and the opportunity in Alberta came up. My wife grew up in Edmonton, so Alberta was sort of the place that we were looking for. And GE at the time had built a customer innovation center. And what GE was struggling with was that, they had all these products, they had all these assets, these equipments, jet engines, MRI machines, you name it, right? But they really couldn't connect it with the Canadian economy. And they wanted to find ways to sell these assets into Canada, whereas their businesses were based out of the US. So they built this innovation center as a way to showcase these existing solutions and for customers to come in and see demos and buy them, right? It was not working very well for them, especially in the Calgary Innovation Center. And they were looking for someone who thought differently about innovation. At that time, I was the director of innovation at Avery Dennison, and we were launching quite a few products and being quite successful. So I had framed innovation in a slightly different way. I thought of innovation as not selling existing products, but solving customer problems. And so when I joined GE, they gave me the opportunity. I took the opportunity to really move away from sort of sterile conference rooms where we're showing PowerPoint presentations of our technologies and trying to sell them to customers, to kind of understanding and benchmarking what the top 5 challenges were in the industry. Everything from, for example, pipelines that were leaking, to renewable energy, to, how to safely and efficiently frack oil and gas out of the ground. And then what we did was turn these rooms into actual demos of technologies that solve very specific problems for our customers, and then found lead customers who would work with us to sort of solution and take these problems into the marketplace that used some elements of GE's existing assets, but required us to innovate because the solution set wasn't complete yet. And then what I found out was that, GE was very good at sort of selling its existing solutions, but really were challenged to innovate at the pace that our customers wanted, especially when it came to software. And so I saw the opportunity to connect some of the local startups in Alberta with that lead customer who was buying the technology with GE's assets. And it was incredible to see that magic that happened when, the GE brand backed up a startup, worked together with my engineers to really solve problems for a customer. And we would iterate quickly, would experiment quickly. We would demo to, 10, 15 customers a day to learn and quickly adjust. And we would send products into market within 3-4 months of the original idea and built a pretty large portfolio that was incredibly valuable for GE. So that really was my day-to-day, and it really turned how I think about innovation into a very practical sense of collaboration. It's an ecosystem. You can't innovate alone in a company. You have to bring external perspective. You have to understand your customers' challenges. You have to empathize with your customers' challenges. And you have to be able to build stuff that sells, right? At the end of the day, I still remember one of the first things we do when we have an innovative idea or problem to solve. We sort of do a mock-up, and then we try and create a real-life buying scenario for a customer to see if the customer will buy the innovation before it's even been built. You learn so much in experiences like that help us sort of drive innovation forward.
That's really interesting because what you're describing, 4 months is really fast for when you think of a company as large as GE, because coming from a startup background, like that's typically how startups like to deliver very fast, but you never hear of big companies delivering that fast. It's usually like 4 months to even agree on a decision, let alone like a deliverable.
That's exactly, and we wouldn't have been able to do that without the startup there with us, right?
Yeah.
That they pushed us significantly because these entrepreneurs do not have time to wait 6 months for decisions to be made, right?
Yeah.
So,
how did you guys deal with the IP or like shared IP, or was it just like the startups worked with you and like they just
that's a really good question, and that's where my role as the interface between the startup and GE was important, right? Obviously, GE's legal teams would love, the natural inclination is to own the IP completely, and so this required, me to find legal teams within GE who really had innovation on their mind, were able to really partner up with startups, share the IP in fair and equitable ways, and partner up. Really, at the end of the day, I treated the startup, even a small 4-person startup, as a real equal partner to GE because they were solving an equal share of the problem that the customer wanted, right? And so we were quite successful. Unfortunately, GE was a very forward-thinking company and saw the opportunity to combine digital innovation and sort of the physical hardware to solve problems for customers. And, the IP sharing issue was not as big of a problem as I originally thought it would.
Well, I mean, that sounded like a really exciting role as a chief innovation officer. Like, So what made you kind of eventually decide that, hey, maybe the pastures are greener at WestJet, or like what made you what got you attracted to that role at WestJet?
That's a great question. As you know, when I was the G innovation leader, I sort of was innovating in a few verticals: aviation, oil and gas, healthcare, renewables, power. And at the time, WestJet was looking to decide which wide body fleet they were going to invest in. It was between the Boeing 787 and an Airbus product. And GE sells engines, the Gen X engines, into the Boeing 787 product. So I had engaged WestJet on a bunch of innovation opportunities as part of our ability to really help them solve existing problems with their fleet. And we had a startup that was working with GE at the time that could help WestJet predict engine failures before they happen. Obviously not, in-flight shutdown of engines, but smaller predictable events that required us to sort of turn unplanned downtime or unplanned events into planned events. So predicting failures before they happen. And so, we were using artificial intelligence and predictive algorithms for that. As I got to learn about WestJet, I got to learn about their culture, the way they engage their vendors, and the way they thought about problem solving. And I was really enamored by them, right? And the other thing was I saw the opportunity to finally work for a company where I was right in the middle of their corporate headquarters. I was right in the thick of where all their decisions were getting made. And I would be an officer of the company as well. Whereas at GE, even though I led innovation in Canada, the headquarters for GE Canada was in Toronto and the headquarters for GE was in Boston, right? So I really wasn't in the thick of things. And I thought this was a great opportunity to really understand how those decisions get made and be a part of that, the future of a company the size of WestJet. It was really attractive to me, and that's why I joined.
Did you know that every time you left a 5 out of 5 review for this podcast, a Tamil parent lets their child pursue a career in the creative arts? Okay, that's probably not true, but if there's a chance that it is, do you really want to jinx it? Leave a review. Do it for the young creative in you.
And like, now that you're kind of in the company, I know you're excited about solving certain kind of problems, but do you also get kind of or insights, or have you like derived any insights about the future of travel based on obviously the pandemic and the big shift and kind of that shutdown of 2 years of travel in general, and now like things picking up again in a big way? How is like WestJet, or like you being involved in like technical operations, like what are you seeing as a future of travel?
Yeah, listen, in technical operations role, I'm responsible for about 800 engineers, and we're responsible for maintaining the fleet. We're responsible for making sure the fleet is safe to travel, right? And it's a role that's really internally focused, operationally focused. But I mean, we definitely see a lot of trends in the travel industry that are emerging. Obviously, the low cost model for travel is picking up. That's why you see all these ultra low cost carriers at Flair and Lynx and Canada Jetlines joining the fray here. And so I think there's an element of disruption happening in the industry. I think the hub and spoke model is under attack simply because it's an expensive way for a legacy carrier to operate, whereas ultra low cost carriers sort of do point to point and are finding ways to sort of deliver experience at value to our guests, which is why we obviously have our ultra low cost brand Swoop. So I do see that trend continuing. I do see digitization of the traveler's experience also improving as well, right? I mean, there are innovations in other parts of the world that are yet to hit Canada, right? We should not be losing a bag and not being able to track where that bag is, right? These are things that we need to innovate in, and that's going to become sort of table stakes for our organization or for the airline industry going forward as well. I think the largest thrust for innovation is probably going to happen on the asset side as well. I think fuel sources, powertrains, obviously sustainable aviation fuel is going to be a key part of our future. And you're seeing Silicon Valley and a bunch of entrepreneurs throw a lot of money into different powertrains for jet engines, right? And propellers as well. So electricity-based systems that once you get over the hump of being able to recharge those batteries on the ground quickly enough, I think adoption rates are going to go up as well. So I think, you're going to see a lot of business model innovation on the low cost side. You're going to see a lot of traveler experience that's more digitized. I think you're going to see assets and how we travel and how it impacts the environment change significantly as well. Those are three vectors that I see happening.
I'm just very happy to talk to you because I'm a huge fan of WestJet, like I mentioned too. So I hope they keep innovating, because that's the only airline that I travel with within North America and the Caribbean. You talk about innovation, like, you seem like someone that's kind of just always thinking, theorizing, just processing a lot of information. And like, well, I'm curious for you, like, who's a thought leader that you look up to, and like, why do you look up to that person?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that. I was thinking about that question, and there are a couple of recent thought leaders. So I've been listening to a podcast called Acquired. It's hosted by Ben Gilbert and David Rosenthal. These guys, a bunch of venture capitalists who every week they post about a company, the history, and how that company has been successful, how it grew to the size it is, right? So everything from Walmart to Amazon, you name it, and they've been around for 11 seasons, and so they've got a lot of guests coming in, and one of them is a co-founder and investor of NZZ Capital, non-zero sum capital, and his name is Brad Slingerland, and he's interesting, right? I mean, I read a lot, I listen a lot, so my thought leaders are sort of niche by nature, but I found him quite interesting because he's sort of at the nexus of allocating capital in a very complex world, and he places bets and on themes and trends that really require you to take risk in a calculated way. And I'm always curious to see how he thinks about that. And he recently published a paper where, he suggests that large change events are far more likely to occur than what sort of our normal math, our normal distribution curves would lead us to believe. And I thought that was interesting just based on what we've gone through in our industry with COVID and everything else, right? And he really believes extreme events are no longer common anymore, and they should be anticipated as the norm. And even goes on to suggest that, if you are sort of investing in complex systems, which, how does he define complex system? He says it's a large network of components with central control, exhibits complex behaviors, sophisticated info processing, and adaptive learning. I think that's what he says, right? And he said, listen, you have to be able to invest for resiliency, meaning whatever you invest in has to have the ability to recover from large events. And you have to invest for optionality as well, meaning you better have large potential payoffs resulting from very small investments, which is why I believe VCs, I think, they lose more oftentimes than they win, but they end off better in the long run because some of those small wins pay off big time. So yeah, he's a thought leader. I just like how he thinks about capital and how he connects it to what we deal with every day, right?
Yeah, it's like expected value, right? Like if you look at, somebody had a conversation with Elon Musk, and the probability of him achieving what he did was very low. But if you look at the size of a bet, if you made $100,000 bet on his, whatever, 1% or 0.1% odds of success, the payoff is great. It just depends on your appetite for risk versus.
That's exactly right.
I guess like my personality is at this stage, I wouldn't place huge bets like that. I'm more of like, let compound interest do its work, because most people underestimate the power of, 10-15% compound interest for 20 years, which is what, great capital allocators have done. And it's very underrated. And I believe in that. But there's definitely like a beauty to, even though I wouldn't do it myself personally, of people like that take those extreme bets and make them a reality, because it's very, very hard. Like the probability of someone pulling off what Elon Musk did is very, very low. So, he had to sacrifice a lot personally, health-wise, I'm sure a lot of things to achieve it, but it's not something that I could do, but I admire the result that he achieved. So
yeah. And the thinking and resilient and thought processes that go into thinking that way, right? I think we could all learn from that.
Yeah, I think that the learning is, I think a lot of people, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think people dismiss, there's some people that have extreme thoughts, or maybe they're not like friendly, or like, they don't have a certain personality that people find acceptable to kind of take a message from. But I look beyond, what I've learned to do is look beyond certain controversial figures. Like Elon Musk is controversial for certain things he's done. There's other guys or women that are like that. I've just learned to kind of look past that and be like, you know what, they might be a terrible person, they might be this or that, but this thing they did was, you could actually learn from this particular thing they said or what they did. So
that's right.
Yeah. Failure, I guess the topic of failure, but I don't like to call it that. I'm sure you don't as well. It's learning lesson. What's, I guess, a learning lesson that you've experienced in the last, let's just say 35 years, and what did you learn from that?
I think, listen, obviously the big event that's happened in the last couple of years has been COVID, right? And I think one of the lessons we learned in our industry is just the appreciation for talent, right? When COVID happened and just the bottom dropped out of our revenue profiles, we went into survival mode immediately, right? And we followed a bunch of people. We laid off a significant amount of people, and that's the first time WestJet had laid off anyone in 25 years. And so not only did we lose a lot of talent that we could have used actually when we all of a sudden had to grow back up an airline, 10 years worth of growth in 6 months. But I think we also breached the trust between leadership and the frontline employees and those team members in ways that's going to take a while to rebuild. And I think the lesson I learned from that is, listen, I wish I had fought a lot harder to keep these people and fought that sort of tyranny of the present sense and fear of, oh my God, we're losing a ton of money, we have to survive, and this is the only way to survive, right? And so, appreciating talent in very different ways and not overreacting to large events and not overcorrecting for them, I think is something that I pay very close attention to now.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies, even like smaller startups, I think you underestimate the cost of turnover, because you might think that, hey, I'm going to save a little bit of money for a year, but finding that talent, continuity is like an underrated thing, whether it's like in a company or like even like a professional sports team. Continuity is this thing that you can't describe, but there's, 1+1 = 3 when you have people together for a while. Because
to your point, there's a compounding interest there that people don't really understand and appreciate. Right?
Yeah, if you look at a lot of organizations or like startups or whatever you want to call it, like, entities that have done well, a lot of times there's core relationships that have survived. Like, if you look at Microsoft, it was like Paul Allen and Bill Gates for like 20 plus years, or like Steve Jobs and Wozniak, like, I mean, those are the popular ones, but there's other organizations where the key people have been together for a long time. Because like I'm curious, like the folks that had to be let go, whether it's in the airline industry, like I guess you can speak on that. Did they just not come back, or are they having trouble trusting that once they have a job that they're going to be there, whatever the next catastrophic event is, they might lose their job again? And like, what is the challenge you're having?
I think it's all of the above. I think it's all of the above. Like, we've had a hard time attracting talent back to the organization because they are hired by other companies, and they're successful and they're happy. I think for those that we have called back, they are struggling to come to terms with why they were chosen to be laid off versus the group that had to really burn themselves through COVID just to keep an airline alive as well, right? So there's all these interesting dynamics between people who are here, people who are not here, and then of course between both those groups and leadership that we're all still learning and experimenting through and working through right now, right? I think generally speaking, people are exhausted. People are, fighting cost of living increases and just all these challenges. So it's incredibly important to really, as a leader today, pay attention to your people, put them first, understand and value talent, and not really overcorrect for when large events occur, because at the end of the day, your headcount costs are minuscule compared to the cost of having to to lose this talent or to lose the continuity that they bring when things return to normal, right?
Yeah, I mean, with turnover, with turnover, it's like, it's not just the cost of, the higher cost of hiring somebody new to replace that person you let go, but it's also the onboarding costs, or like, how long before they become not useful, but they're contributing like the person that you replaced.
That's exactly right.
Was networking, or like what people describe as networking, was that a factor in you getting these opportunities?
It's a great question. I would say that my most intense networking happened when I was at GE, right? Because think about my role. Every day I would present to at least 3 or 4 startups, trying to attract them into my innovation ecosystem, or I would partner up with them to present to customers I'm trying to attract as lead customers, or I'm connecting inside my GE organization to find someone who can help me partner up with me to solve a problem, right? And so I thought that that the network I built there was incredibly helpful in helping me find, obviously, the job at WestJet, but more importantly, to help me solve problems that I was trying to solve at GE as well. I think the practice of networking itself is just incredibly valuable, right? Because you just get yourself out of your comfort zone and you learn to connect with others and think differently and really appreciate other perspectives as well. So I would say that I have not, networked sort of generally outside of the work setting. I'm not someone who actively goes to associations or goes to meet and greets outside of the work setting. But within the work setting, I have learned to leverage networking as a way to catalyze problem solving, to catalyze different thinking, and to inspire and motivate teams when I feel like we're stale or we're stuck.
And, Gandeephan, if you're looking back, if you had a chance to go back in a time machine and talk to your 16-year-old self, what would you tell him?
That's an interesting question, right?
Money can be hard to come by, but here's a $100 opportunity for you. Join my free newsletter for free exclusive content and a free chance to win $100 when I hold special draws. Did I mention that it's free?
It's interesting. I was thinking about that, and I have a hard time really placing myself in the shoes of my 16-year-old self. And what that tells me is I'm not sure how sort of present and aware I was when I was 16, right? I think I was always thinking about the future or always thinking about the past, one of the other things, but I really never was present. Whereas even if I talk to others, they know exactly how they were feeling, what they were doing, and how they were behaving when they were 16 years old. So I would say, listening to any 16-year-old or to my version of 16-year-old, remember that, being present with the people that you love the most is probably one of the most foundational things that you can do for yourself at that time, right? Because you never get that time back. And I think that even today as an adult, we tend to sort of look too far into the future. We tend to look far in the past. And being present has so much value that is underestimated, right? It's something that I think it's good for your mental health. It's good for how you engage others. It's just generally important. It's just something that I would recommend.
No, it's great because I think it's something I thought I was good at, but until I had twins like 2 years ago, and kind of the time I spend with them at the beginning, I was always like, okay, I need to like do work, or like there's something else on my mind, and I felt like there was a conflict in the sense that I wasn't really enjoying my time with them, or also whatever problem I was thinking about. Versus when I just said, forget about the other thing, I'm here with them, it just changed. Like they really taught me, or really re-emphasized that to me of like the present of being present. Like I think they say the present of being present.
Yes,
You know?
yes, absolutely. And I think, especially nowadays with all the distractions we get with social media and devices and whatnot, I think being present truly is a gift, and it's very tough to learn if you don't learn that young. And that's something that I try and teach my kids, right?
Because I think they say, money is cheap, or not, it's not cheap, but it's like it's you can get it if you want to find it, but the hardest thing or the hardest resource to get in today's time is attention, because people's attention is so fragmented, like it goes like that. So if you can even have like dinner with a friend or like family member, and like it's just like an hour of focused time, that is like very rare and precious, and just something I'm actively working on. So that's great that you brought that up.
It's definitely a journey. Now,
looking forward, in terms of your personal legacy, like how do you want to be remembered by your friends and family?
See, I'm a pretty simple guy that way, right? I think, for me, and maybe I've reached a certain age in my life where I might have achieved certain things that I'm not feeling pretty grandiose about my legacy. I just want to be remembered as someone who made you feel good, happy, and joyful when you were around me, right? I think I would love that as my legacy. It's that simple. And I think it speaks to the frame of mind that I want to be in, and I want to be able to portray. And I just, it's important to me. It's something that I have tried to practice for quite a while now. I did not practice that when I was younger. And as I get older, especially after I started having kids, and you get to see how they feel around you and how you are their entire world. And you realize that, maybe other adults aren't that much different, right? What you say, how you say it, how you're around them makes a big difference. And so I think that's my personal legacy, right? I think, you know what they say, people always remember how you made them feel more than what you said to them. And I think that is something that I would love as my legacy.
Love it. Well, now we get to the last part of the podcast, is a fun speed run I like to call Creator Confessions.
All right.
I want to say a bunch of very quick statements, and you're going to just tell me the first answer that pops to mind. Ready?
Oh boy. All right.
Favorite Tamil food?
Famous kothurati.
Something that scares you?
Scary movies.
Insecurity that you have?
I'm going to let others down.
Your favorite show that you're watching?
Favorite show I'm watching? Power of the Rings.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, I'm watching that. Somewhere you're itching to travel to?
Back to Sri Lanka, actually.
A fellow Tamil creator you want to give a shout out to?
I want to give a shout out to my brother, Janta. Yeah, he's in RBC. He was an entrepreneur before he joined RBC as well. And he's doing some incredible things over there. So shout out to him.
Favorite childhood memory?
Playing soccer with my brothers and my dad.
Something you like to do for fun outside of work?
I love to read.
Favorite movie of all time?
Oof. I'd have to say Lord of the Rings as well.
Something that you purchased or splurged on in the last few years that you have no regret about?
An extension on my home.
Pet peeve of yours?
People who are late.
A celebrity or person that you look up to.
Elon Musk, actually. He's
You're like
nuts,
the
but he's a good
you're
guy.
like the 40th person that said that. That guy's good at marketing.
He is.
If you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, a regret that you would have.
Not spending more time with my kids.
A book you've read or a podcast you've listened to that's had an impact on you.
Listening to Sam Walton's History of Walmart, Made in America. It's a really interesting book.
Belief, behavior, or habit that's improved your life.
Belief, behavior, or habit that has improved my life. That's a tough one. Oh my gosh, you caught me there. I think hard work. I think I'll keep it simple. Hard work. Right. Whenever I feel like I'm slacking off and I feel comfortable, I challenge myself. It's an auto response system for me.
And finally, a piece of advice that you want to give to your fellow aspiring Tamil creators out there.
Get away from it all. Go live somewhere else. Challenge yourself. Meet new people. Try not to stay close to home, and I think you'll benefit from it.
Love it. Well, Gandeephan, that was amazing. I had high expectations for this conversation, and you met them. I think this audience will really enjoy the conversation as well. If there's someone that's listening to this and they want to reach out because your story has inspired them in some way, what's the best way for someone to reach out to you?
My email address, gandeephan@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for making time, and for the audience listening, I appreciate you guys as always.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.